Hey everyone, we're going around the Big Ten. It's our Week 13 predictions show. We have a full slate of Big Ten games this week. I'm Marc Givler, got Chip Minnich with me here as always to break down the latest in the Big Ten Conference. Chip, a better slate than last week. We kind of complained about the games last weekend, didn't really like the slate. Most teams, I think most, if not all teams are back in action now, I think. And so we have a full slate and some really interesting games, which we'll get to here in a minute, obviously. We're down to the wire here. It looks like Oregon has clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game. So we're kind of down to Ohio State, Indiana, Penn State seem to be the three that have a chance to join Oregon and Indianapolis. It's kind of a mini rivalry week too. We have some interesting rivalry type games this weekend, so we'll get to those as well. But the slate kicks off on Friday night, as always. Purdue, Michigan State. And Michigan State is as time of recording, is a 13.5-point home favorite. Michigan State did not get it done last week against Illinois, so they need to win out here the next 2 weeks to become bowl eligible. Had a bit of a second half collapse there after it was pretty close. Purdue is obviously, as we've talked about many times, Purdue is just a program in disarray right now. But again, Michigan State 2-touchdown favorite. Chip, what do you see here? Is there any chance for Purdue to upset here, or is this a Michigan State kind of one of the locks of the week?
I would say it's pretty much close to a lock of the week. I mean, let's face it. When it comes to Purdue, they gave Illinois a few weeks ago everything that they could handle, taking that game into overtime. But ever since that, Purdue has basically fallen apart. I know that Michigan State has been tremendously inconsistent. They're coming off a losing streak, but as you said, the possibility of a bowl game is still within grasp. I'm not saying that they're going to get there. They would obviously have to win this game. They have to win next week, but that would be such a significant milestone. And I think, just from my perspective, I believe that Jonathan Smith has been laying the groundwork to, his players, like, hey, we can get to the postseason. We can be on the right path towards turning the program around. So I think Michigan State is in really good shape for a Friday night game against Purdue.
Yeah, I think Michigan State wins big. I think they probably cover that spread. I'm obviously a Jonathan Smith guy, so maybe I'm a little biased on this. I think he's good. I think Michigan State fans are getting impatient already. I'm a little surprised how impatient Michigan State fans have been with him. I don't think the program was in nearly as good of a shape as maybe they thought it was when he took over. I think that's going to take some time. They've got some young talent. They've got a very young quarterback. They've got some really good skill talent, that young players. So I like the direction they're going. I know this year has been a roller coaster. They've had some really good highs. They've had some really bad lows, just some tough games. But I think this will be a good hire long term. And I think Michigan State fans should probably just take a deep breath for a minute and just, again, I think this program was not nearly as well set up for him taking over as maybe they thought it was.
Oh, I completely agree with that sentiment. I think I probably the frustration if I could play armchair psychiatrist for Michigan State, is like the frustration probably stems from the fact that it was the program was on a decline during the latter years of Mark D'Antonio's tenure. And then everything that happened with Mel Tucker, the immediate, okay, everything is, kind of back to, seemingly back to normal, but the foundation was built exclusively, seemingly, on the transfer portal players that Mel Tucker brought in. And then everything collapsed. I think like maybe that frustration has just been borne out over the fact that, like, it seems like the program's been in steady decline. To your point, Jonathan Smith is a program builder. I mean, what he did at Oregon State, and now that he has more resources within the Big Ten, I think I'll give Michigan State fans that are skeptical some credit in the sense that Jonathan Smith, he has to prove it on the recruiting trail, but I think he's going to do a great job. Like you said, Aiden Childs is a player to build around, and I think Michigan State can certainly handle Purdue and possibly be within bowl game contention.
Yeah, and certainly Michigan State is better than a 4-6 program. I mean, historically, this is a program that shouldn't be scratching and clawing at the end of November to get their 6th win to be bowl eligible. That's obviously that's a one point of emphasis for the fan base, I'm sure, is where they're coming from, is like, this is not good enough. And it isn't long term, but another thing you hit on with the transfer portal, and I said this at the time, and I think with every passing day we learn how good Kenneth Walker was, because that was really that's the common thread between like any success they've had post Marc D'Antonio is Kenneth Walker. And what I said at the time was, it's one thing to come in like Tucker did and like patch it up in 1 year and like, okay, great, you had a nice season, but you can't sustain that. The transfer portal is important. Like, you have to be able to go in and like with precision and go get 3 or 4 guys a year that are going to make a difference for you. But you can't hire 20 new mercenaries every year. You just can't. It doesn't work. You have no culture when you do that. You have no foundation when you do that. It's putting a Band-Aid on like a gunshot wound. Like, it's not something that's sustainable long term. You might you might get lightning in a bottle like you did with Kenneth Walker 1 year, but to turn over 20, 25 players in the portal every year, it's not realistic. And so they've got to give Jonathan Smith some time to get out of that cycle, I think. But I think they're going to win big on Friday night, and then we'll see. We'll see if they can make it to a bowl game or not. But again, I would give this guy a couple years. Like, we're seeing around the country like some craziness. Like, a lot of it's the G5 level, but like, we're seeing a lot of teams just be like, oh, this isn't working. It's like, well, did you really give it any time? And so I just think let's give this guy some time. He's done this at Oregon State, which is a tougher program to win at. Like, just let's give this guy a chance. Moving on, we've got Illinois. This is actually an interesting game. We got Illinois at Rutgers, 12 p.m. on Peacock on Saturday afternoon. Illinois is, at time of recording, a 1-point road favorite at Rutgers. We weren't sure how to handicap the Rutgers-Maryland game last week because of Kyle Monungai's health. Clearly healthy, had a very good game. Rutgers wins. They're bowl eligible. They're 6-4. Illinois is at 7-3. They beat Michigan State at home. So I had Michigan State in a close one. Illinois was able to pull away there, especially in the fourth quarter, and turn a close game into a pretty stress-free win. So, Rutgers, Illinois, probably feeling pretty good about themselves after last week. Both have the stress of bowl eligibility off their shoulders, can kind of play freely. What do you see here? Illinois 1-point favorite. So Vegas is basically saying, coin flip. What do you think is going to happen here?
I'm glad that you mentioned that it's basically a coin flip, because it's difficult to see, for example, all right, this being anyone having any decided advantage. I think both teams, we talk about this all the time, is that Bielema as well as Schiano's teams, they're kind of almost, cut from the same cloth. And but what I mean by that is, let's run the ball well. Let's play, sound physical defense. I guess the way I see it is, if I had to, so the fact that Illinois is just that slight 1-point favorite, I'm going to go with Illinois for the simple reason that, and this is going to fall under the category of easier said than done, is I think when it comes to Rutgers, Kyle Monungai is much more of a factor in terms of the Rutgers offense. And I think Illinois and Bielema, I think their defensive staff is going to do everything they can to, I'm not saying completely shut him down, but to try to neutralize him. And I just don't see Rutgers offensively being able to necessarily diversify enough. Whereas I think Illinois, granted, they're not necessarily an offensive juggernaut by any stretch of the imagination. I think Illinois just has just a little bit more. So I look at this as being low scoring, hard hitting. I mean, the kind of game that, basically like this is old school Big Ten, even though Rutgers has only been in the conference for about 10 years now.
I really like the under. It's 40 over under is 47.5 right now, time of recording. I really like the under this weekend. I think
point. Very good point.
Certainly 24, I think, gets you there. 21 may get you there in this one. I think the game's going to move quickly. A lot of running. Again, I think these are two teams who want to establish the run. I think with Rutgers, particularly as you kind of hit on, I think they're easier to defend because I just don't know that they have the plethora of weapons. Like if you take away Monangai, can they hurt you? And I really don't think they've proven that they can, especially when you look at how they've performed offensively without him. So I'm with you. I've got Illinois like something like 20-17, something like that. Like
that
by a
seems
field goal, like
right.
Whichever team successfully makes their field goals, basically, whichever kicker can hit a 40-yarder or something on Saturday can win this for his team, I think. But that's kind of how I see it. It could definitely see a defensive or special teams touchdown turning this as well. That's part of what they do, and especially with Schiano and special teams. So that would be an angle or a path maybe for Rutgers is to make a big special teams play. But I'm with you. I see this game very similarly to how you see it. Also at 12, Iowa at Maryland on Big Ten Network. Iowa, at time of recording, is a 6-point road favorite at Maryland. Both teams not great lately, that's for sure. Both teams not great lately. Maryland at 4-6, Iowa at 6-4. So Maryland is desperately trying to get bowl eligible. They're only 1-6 in the Big Ten this year. Really bad loss, in my opinion, the way they lost at home last weekend to Rutgers. That was not a particularly super competitive game. They just look like they're tail spinning right now. Is there a chance? I mean, the line's not that big. It's only 6 point. Iowa's only a 6-point favorite, which is a little surprising to me. So does Vegas know something here? Is this game going to be closer than people think? Like, is it going to be an ugly, because Iowa's offense obviously is Caleb Johnson or bust, but like, is there a path here for a Maryland upset?
There's a path, but it's I'd say it's somewhat perilous. It might be, when I look at Maryland, I think I see them, Billy Edwards throws the ball a lot. But in terms of the style of play that Iowa, I go back to the fact that like the more physical style of team, and granted, Iowa, like you said, Caleb Johnson or bust. I mean, they're going with Jackson Stratton supposedly at quarterback. I guess, Cade McNamara, I'm not sure if he's just medically unable or if the decision has been made to like, okay, we're going to go with Jackson Stratton, who's a former Colorado State quarterback. I think Iowa, they're going to, like you said, they're going to rely on Caleb Johnson. They're going to rely on their defense. I think that Maryland, the fact that they throw the ball a lot, but I think you kind of hit on it with regard to the bad loss last week to Rutgers. I think, they're a similar style of team. So I think Iowa's going to win this one. And I think, in terms of, like that 6-point spread, I think, Vegas, I think they know something. So I'd feel comfortable betting on Iowa.
Iowa's probably the one team in the Big Ten I've missed on this year. I thought they would be a lot better. And certainly, like I wasn't under the delusion that like their offense was going to like all of a sudden that Brian Ferentz wasn't calling plays anymore. That all of a sudden like Iowa's offense was going to take off and become Alabama or Ohio State or something like that. But I thought it'd be better. Like Caleb Johnson's had a great year. The quarterback situation's been a nightmare. Even when everyone's healthy, it just hasn't been good enough. The receiver situation's been a little crazy. I thought the receivers would be better. The whole Caleb Brown thing didn't work.
Right.
I thought that would be a better fit. But quite frankly, their defense has been a little disappointing in the big game. Like they got bullied by Ohio State. Okay, fine. Ohio State bullies teams sometimes. They got bullied by Wisconsin, who isn't bullying like anybody this year. There's something off, and I think they're going to win. Because again, I think they're, like you said, I think they're very similar to Rutgers. And Maryland, I thought, failed the toughness test in a big way last week against Rutgers. I think they'll fail the toughness test again this week against Iowa. But I thought Iowa was like a sleeper, like could win 10 games. Their schedule's not good. Like their schedule's bad. They avoided a lot of really good teams in the Big Ten. They got Ohio State on the road, which everyone knew that was a tough draw, but They lose to Iowa State on like that 50-some yard field goal at the buzzer. Like they always comes out like a 50-yard kick in that game, and whoever, make or miss to win the game. But I don't know. I thought they were a sleeper 9 to 10 win team. That hasn't played out that way. I'm going to go Iowa, but I think it's going to be closer than Iowa fans are going to be happy with. Give me something. Give me like 24-21.
Okay. And something
like 24-21.
Something you mentioned that sparked that sparked a thought is that you mentioned how Brian Ferentz is no longer on Iowa staff. Guess what? He's on Maryland staff. So I guess you could say this is the Ferentz Bowl. Not that that's I really don't know what kind of an influence Brian Ferentz has had on the Maryland offense. I just know that when I watch Billy Edwards, it seems like Maryland, I mean, that they're effective at throwing the ball, but I guess I'm just old school in the sense that we're in November. It's the Big Ten. Not that Maryland, I don't anticipate, the weather being atrocious or by any stretch, but like when it starts to get into like the cold, dark times of November, that I think that's when it's like you have to rely on a running game. And like I said earlier, and you agreed with me that, I think the more physical team that Maryland plays, that's where they seem to struggle. So I think your score is pretty accurate. I don't think Iowa fans are going to be ecstatic about the result, but they'll take the win and improve their bowl game destination.
Yeah, this screams like a game that's going to drive Iowa fans crazy to me. But and it'll be interesting because next week's Thanksgiving, and we'll sit around the Thanksgiving table there at the Ferentz family and be like, "Hey, how many of our Iowa State secrets did you give to Maryland, son?"
There you go.
That'd be a fun conversation between those guys afterwards. But yeah, I think you asked, how much influence Brian Ferentz has. Probably zero, given how much they throw the ball. probably zero, since they've had some success throwing the football. So that's the noon slate minus one big game of the week, which we'll get to at the end here. 3:30's got some interesting ones as well. 3:30 p.m. CBS, Penn State at Minnesota. Penn State 11.5 point favorite, time of recording, on the road. Minnesota's bowl eligible. Minnesota is another one of those Big Ten teams where I don't think you know what you're going to get from week to week. They're perfectly capable of pulling an upset here. They're also perfectly capable of losing by 30. Like, I don't have a great read for this Minnesota team. Chip, again, Penn State comes in, multi-score favorite. They did this to Washington recently. They've done this recently where it's like the spread's around 2 touchdowns and then they cruise. Are they going to cruise again, or does Minnesota give them a big scare at home?
I think Minnesota's going to give them a big scare at home. And this is not something that, if I was a Penn State fan, that I would be sitting back, feeling extremely comfortable and confident, because I've seen this story before. In 2019, Penn State was undefeated, went to Minnesota in November. Guess what? Minnesota pulled off the upset. Now, to your point, I think that Minnesota is kind of an enigma. Like they sometimes, for example, they look, that they're one of those teams that is playing better. Case in point being that they handled Illinois very easily, and then there are times where it's like, okay, they kind of embarrass themselves. So I'm going to go with Penn State, but I think, again, I'm not the gambling type, but I would say that, that I think you said 11 or 11.5. I think that's pretty generous. I think Minnesota, the fact that it is 3:30, which means it's going to get dark, it's going to be cold, it's outside. Minnesota, not that Penn State, for example, that they aren't used to playing outside in bad weather. I'm just saying that the conditions are ripe for Minnesota to be, playing in it. And PJ Fleck is going to pull out any and all, motivational tricks and ploys and whatever to, like they're disrespecting you, and look at, like the fact that they're coming in here thinking that this is an easy win, and whatever he says or however he does it, rowing the boat, say what you will, the guy, it's not uncommon for his teams to rise to the occasion. So I think Penn State wins, but I think this is going to be closer than the Vegas odds makers have it.
Yeah, I agree. I've got Penn State winning probably in that 7 to 10 point range. I think I predict Minnesota will either attempt a fake kick or an onside kick, like a fake field goal, fake punt, or an onside kick. I feel like we're going to get at least one of those three things on Saturday. I think, again, with Penn State being the more talented team, not that Penn State's got like this plethora of like receivers or anything, but they're the more talented team. They've got the more talented quarterback. They've got the more talented backs. They got Tyler Warren. Like, I think with Penn State being the more talented team, the conditions will favor Minnesota. I think if this game was, in 60-degree weather, clear skies, everything, or indoors, I think that favors Penn State. I think the weather will favor Minnesota. I think Penn State escapes. Again, I'll say 10. I think they cover. So give me like 27-17 or something like that would be like a score, I think, or something like that. I don't know that they'll get all the way to covering, but I think they'll win by maybe 2 score, like 10. Maybe a late field goal to seal it and put them up 10 or something. But I agree. This is a spot. Penn State's got to be careful here. Like, they're in a great spot right now. They're 2 wins away from possibly, you don't even have to play in the Big Ten Championship. You just go 11-1 and just watch whoever it is, whether it's Oregon, Ohio State, or Oregon, Indiana. Let those teams duke it out in Indianapolis. You sit there at 11-1, you get your home playoff game. As possibly like as high as a 5 or a 6 seed. Probably, I think they're going to fall in that 6 seed area. It just depends what, like if Ohio State plays Oregon and then Ohio State beats Oregon, maybe Penn State's pushes down a little bit further, but they're in line for a home playoff game. I just got to be careful here. I think this is a game you got to be careful. This is definitely a trap game in my opinion. Moving on to, got a couple 3:30s here. On Fox Sports 1 at 3:30, we have Northwestern at Michigan. Michigan coming off the bye. Northwestern coming off the Wrigley Field game against Ohio State. The loss there, 31-7, which I predicted on the button, by the way. So the stars aligned. I had 31-7. It was 31-7. So that won't happen again the rest of the season, I'm sure. Michigan, a 10.5 point favorite, over under 36.5. So this is like first team to like 18 or 17 wins type of game. Again, Michigan coming off the bye at home. Any threat here for Michigan?
Oh, I think there's definitely a threat. I think Northwestern, they showed the capacity to pull out the stops against Ohio State. Northwestern recognized that they were outmanned by Ohio State on the talent side. When it comes to Michigan, I don't think that they're necessarily outmanned. I mean, I think that Northwestern traditionally is a really good team defensively, or at least they're pretty solid. Running the ball, I think they're going to try and do whatever they can. Their bowl game eligibility is not completely out of their grasp. I think for both teams, that's kind of, I think it probably feels more urgent for Michigan, because I think they recognize the fact, all right, this is it, because we're going to Columbus the following week. So they know that they have to do that. I think Michigan, I'm going to give the Wolverines the edge, but I think this is going to be like a real ugly game, just because, let's face it, Michigan, their passing game starts and finishes with Colston Loveland. They've got Khalil Mullings, who's, I think, a really good physical running back, but Northwestern, I look for them to keep this really close. But
Michigan winning?
Michigan winning. Sorry.
Michigan wins a close one. Okay.
Close
Just
one.
want to make sure. I want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Michigan's going to cover. I do. I don't. They're coming off the bye. They have to win this game. They do not want to go to Columbus next week, 5-6, needing a win to go to a bowl game. Like, that's just that can't be the situation for them. I thought Northwestern did just about everything right against Ohio State last week that they could control, and it still was like just a gradual pull away. Now, Ohio State's a bit of a different bear, but I think Michigan, I agree with you. One thing I agree, it's going to be ugly. It's not going to be nothing about this game is going to be pretty, but I think Michigan just grinds and grinds and grinds, and maybe goes into the fourth quarter and it's like, 13-7 or 10-7 or something like that. And then Michigan just kind of like puts together some methodical drive and puts them away. I think Michigan's going to win like something like 21-10 or even more than that. Actually, I'm going to go, it's 10.5. I think like 24-10, maybe even.
Okay.
Like that. I think it's going to be a 2-score win. I think they are going to cover that 10.5. Maybe buy it to 10 if you're going to actually play the game out there. That 10.5 is kind of weird, but I think Michigan's going to, I don't say cruise. I don't know if it's possible for either of these teams to cruise on anybody this year, but it's going to be one of those games where even when they're up like 7, it's going to feel like they're up like 20. Like it's just going to be one of those games where it's like, I know it's only 17-10 right now, but it just feels like Michigan's got this thing like on total lockdown. It's going to be one of those games. But we'll see. Obviously big game for both in terms of bowl eligibility. So we will see what happens there. Another interesting game, 2 5-5 teams, bowl eligibility again, kind of a regional rivalry type of situation, kind of two programs who are finding themselves, I think, in similar situations right now in terms of trying to rebuild their identities, rebuild their programs. And that is Wisconsin at Nebraska. That's 3:30 on Big Ten Network. And again, here we go. It's essentially a coin flip. It's Nebraska minus 1.5 at home as of time of this recording. This is another one. I'm like, I think Wisconsin's playing better lately. Feels like, gave Oregon a scare. Smoked Iowa a few weeks ago. Nebraska's kind of going the opposite direction right now, but Nebraska's back at home, and we're for like the 5th straight week. It's like, can Nebraska get bowl eligible? Like, it's like one of those things where it's like, is this helping them at this point, or is this actually hurting? Like, is each building week like, oh my gosh, we're still not bowl eligible? Is this like hurting them? It feels like it's a thing now where it's like almost like you're trying too hard, and you're making mistakes you weren't making at the beginning of the year. Like, how do you see this one playing out? And just two weird programs right now.
I like the fact that I agree with the technical assessment that weird. And honestly, it's a tough one to call because, like you said, psychologically, I think both programs are just kind of, just trying to find something positive to grasp and hold on to. And they know, both programs know that they are right at that point where it's like, all we got to do is get one more win and we can keep our season going and use that as a building block for hopefully better things in 2025. I'm going with Nebraska for the simple reason that not only is it at home, I believe that Matt Rule has a better finger on the pulse of his team in terms of psychologically, in terms of they know that they played USC tough and that there was a non-call that almost anyone, unless your vision has completely failed you, that they were completely, and I said this before, that I don't believe that they were necessarily going to win that game against USC, but they should have had an untimed down to try and score a touchdown. That being said, the fact that it's at home, I think Nebraska, I think Dylan Raiola has shown some signs of regression, but I just feel better about the fact that Nebraska at home, even though Wisconsin is playing better, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to give Nebraska the slight edge, and Nebraska, they'll get that psychological burden of not being in a bowl game for the first time since 2016 off of their collective psyches.
Yeah, I agree. I am going to also pick Nebraska in a close game, probably an ugly game. Mm-hmm. Luke Fickell finally fired Phil Longo, which I completely talked about at the beginning of the week in the other previous episode. If anyone wants to watch that, like, great move. Should have never hired him. Right. Shouldn't have waited this long to fire him. But when you do that in the middle of the season, it does throw things into a bit of chaos when you change coordinators midseason. Nebraska's at home. Both of these teams are in a similar spot. Like you've got like rivalry game like type stuff next week. Nebraska is at Iowa on Friday night, and Wisconsin hosts Minnesota on Friday afternoon. Neither one of these teams wants to be 5-6 going to that, because like the other team, like Iowa and Minnesota, are going to be sitting there like, oh, we can keep these guys out of a bowl game. This is going to be so sweet. Like both teams may be underdogs in those games. Certainly Nebraska will be. Yeah, give me Nebraska.
But like field goal,
like a late like defensive, like either like a defensive score or like a fumble recovery that sets them up for like something.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be like pretty. It's going to be like an ugly, fluky play in the fourth quarter is going to turn this thing. But I will go Nebraska. What do I want to do here for a score? Not that I'm obligated to post a score, but I always like to throw out what I'm thinking. Yeah, like give me Nebraska like 24-21.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right.
Something like that. Field goal game. Yeah, we'll see. All right. Then we finally get Big Ten After Dark. 10:30 p.m. NBC, USC at UCLA. USC 5-5 needs a win to get bowl eligible. UCLA 4-6 needs 2 wins to get bowl eligible after the Washington loss. USC 5-point favorite at time of recording from the Rose Bowl. Chip, what are your thoughts here?
I'm taking UCLA. We talked about, granted UCLA, Washington handled them last Friday night. But I really do believe that Deshaun Foster, he's starting to build something that his program, he's starting to make this his program. And that's not, I'm not saying that as a shot across the bow at Chip Kelly, because I thought Chip Kelly, considering the circumstances, did a solid job at UCLA. But I think the fact that Deshaun Foster played there, was a superstar there, I really do believe that the players are buying in. Eric Bieniemy is the offensive coordinator. He has a reputation, and I think he's enhancing it at the college level. And they're starting to run the ball. Ethan Garber's at quarterback. He's not spectacular, but he's steady. I think UCLA. I know that the odds makers are favoring USC, but I'm going with UCLA. I just think that they recognize the fact that they are getting better. And last year they handled USC. I think they're going to do it again.
I want to pick UCLA. My heart wants to pick UCLA. My head is saying USC. I think Lincoln Riley, we talked about this last week. Like I said, Lincoln Riley could not lose to Nebraska. I don't think he can lose this one either. If they lose, I shouldn't say there's no chance, but I see very little chance that they beat Notre Dame.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah.
So if they lose to UCLA, they're 5-7, and USC's got to start having the discussion of okay, we can no longer give this guy another year or two to lower the buyout. We have to come up with the buyout money if they go 5-7. They have to come out with the buyout money. You can't go 5-7 at USC. You cannot go 5-7 at USC, and you can't do it in a landscape where you just joined the Big Ten. It's going horribly for you. You played the 2 major blue bloods you played for the conference, Michigan and Penn State. You lost both of those games. You lost to Washington, your old Pac-12 rival. And so you didn't even have to play Ohio State or Oregon or Indiana.
You
didn't play 3 of the best 4 teams in the conference, and you went 5-7. That just can't, it can't be. So I think USC is going to win. I think something like 28-21. I think it's going to be pretty close. But I think this is another one where Lincoln Riley has to win this game. I think it's 1,000% over for him if he loses this game. Whether they decide to move on like before the next season starts or down the road, I don't know that is important. The timing of this, I don't know. But if he loses this game, I think it's over. And it's just a matter of USC deciding when they can stomach to pay the buyout. Like at that point, like this is such a downward trajectory at this point, at this program, at that point that you can't, you are no longer a serious program at that point. Like you just aren't. Like you are, in my opinion, you have one of the 5 or 6 best jobs in college football there. In my opinion, it's one of the easiest jobs in college football because you really don't have to leave like a 60-mile radius if you don't want to recruit. You can just stay. I mean, but you have national appeal. You can get kids from all over the country that want to play and be in LA. And you don't have the pressure on you. Not to say there's no pressure at USC. That wouldn't be right. But USC is not the pressure cooker that Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia are. It's just not. It's just not. Like you have the Lakers that take up the Dodgers. Like you have so much pro sports. You have so much celebrity Hollywood. Like you have so many things that are happening in LA that take away being under the microscope that aren't happening in Columbus, Ohio, Austin, Texas, Athens, Georgia, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Like it's just not. So for me, it's like the easiest job in college football in terms of combination of ability to win and the lack of pressure to like be undefeated every year, like it is at some of these other places. And like 5-7, when you've had ample time to bring in all of your guys, bring in all your recruits, your court, like Juju Lewis just committed to Colorado, like a couple hours before we recorded this. Like, what are we doing here? Like this, if you consider USC, let's not even say top 5, because I think it is, but I think certainly you can make arguments for 5. There's 5 other programs you could probably argue for. I don't think you can argue that it's a top 10 job. Like, I don't know how you would come up with 10 better jobs than USC. I think that would be impossible. So let's just say it's top 10. What other top 10 program in college football would accept the last few years?
Oh, none.
So they have to win 28-21 USC. I don't even like the pick. I just think they have to. I think they know they have to. That's basically all I have to add. But it's the second week in a row where like Lincoln Riley has to win this game.
Well, something you said just a moment ago about the fact that, okay, recruiting, and again, this kind of, falls more under, like your area of expertise. Like I follow it, but in terms of like knowing, exactly like the rumors and scuttlebutt, so to speak, supposedly UCLA is making significant yeah,
they're doing a good job,
and so to your point about, all right, this is so crucial for Lincoln Riley, he falling behind his crosstown rival, and the fact that, USC has been suffering a series of decommitments, like you said. I mean, the pressure is definitely, I guess the reason why I'm picking UCLA, I think that the pressure is more on USC. And I just feel that the positive momentum is more on UCLA's side than I know that USC is coming off a win and UCLA is coming off a loss. I just feel that, not that like UCLA is playing with house money by any stretch. I know that they want to win, but I just feel something about like the positive momentum, and psychologically, I think UCLA is just in a better spot, which is why I'm leaning a rivalry game. I'm just going with UCLA for that reason.
Yeah, we can maybe dive in on the reaction show
on
Monday. I'll dive into like some of the USC recruiting. I can do my USC recruiting rant then, because there's some things there. There's some things there that aren't very intelligent. But okay, we have made it to the game of the week. Ohio State, Indiana, noon, big noon kickoff. I know Ohio State fans love it. Big noon kickoff every weekend. For all of eternity, big noon kickoff, Ohio State. It feels that way anyway.
Yes.
Number 2 versus number 5. Obviously, Indiana undefeated. Obviously, everyone in the SEC thinks they are a fraudulent 10-0. We will find out Saturday at noon. Spread has moved a little bit. It's OSU minus 12.5 right now at time of recording. Let's start here. Is there a scenario where Indiana loses on Saturday, beats Purdue the following weekend, which seems 1,000% to happen, and doesn't make the playoff? Like what? Yeah. Like how many points does Ohio State have to win by on Saturday to actually eliminate Indiana from the playoff? Because I don't think there's a number. I mean, maybe it's 70 for me. Is it low? Like what is the number for you that Ohio State would have to beat Indiana by to get the SEC honks what they want, which is Indiana out of the playoff?
I think you hit it right on the head. I think Ohio State, if they come out and put a 56-7, or which they're not going to shut Indiana out. They're not going to. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news for any Ohio State fans who think watch that happen. But honestly, I think that's what it takes. I think it has to be just a complete domination from start to finish. Ohio State just completely, multiple sacks, multiple defensive touchdowns, complete domination from start to finish, that Indiana looks like a fraud, that all the SEC people, and let's face it, they're, their corporate, partners, ESPN, that seemingly is taking up that banner of, we have to get every SEC team into the playoff, and disregard, the results on the field. Yeah. I think Ohio State being extremely dominant. I don't see Ohio State being extremely dominant in this one. I just see this game being, I think Curt Cignetti's a good coach. I think that we talked about the right way of doing the transfer portal. I think Curt Cignetti has done that by bringing in players that played for him at James Madison, as well as, Curtis Rourke from Ohio U. And I think that he's done a terrific job. And this game I think it's going to go down to the wire. And I think Indiana, if they come out on the losing end, I don't think they're going to have anything to worry about in terms of within the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think it's going to be competitive on Saturday. I'm not buying the Ohio State blowout narrative at this point, especially after Seth McLaughlin's injury. I think Ohio State's that left side of the line could be an issue. And look, Donovan Jackson has filled in admirably at left tackle, but he also hasn't really been left alone too much on an island out there against really good pass rushers, which I think is probably an even bigger problem for Ohio State if they win this week and get to the Big Ten championship game. I think it'd be a bigger problem against a team like Oregon, who's got a couple of really good pass rushers. But I think that we are looking at something here, I think Ohio State wins. I don't think it necessarily comes down to the last possession. Like I'm going to say something like 31-21, but it's going to be like a close 31-21. It's going to be something like, Ohio State goes into the fourth quarter, up 7 and is able to kick a field goal, in the first half of the fourth quarter and kind of hold off like a 10-point win. Like, I don't think it's going to be one of those they're up 31-7 and then Indiana gets a couple of garbage touchdowns or anything like that. I think it's going to be significant in terms of a significantly close game. I think Ohio State's going to have to battle for all 60 minutes. And again, I think Indiana's going to have some success offensively. I think, again, that left side of the Ohio State offensive line is critical. We'll see how that holds up. They're moving their left guard, Carson Hinsman, who had been the backup center. They had moved him to left guard to move Donovan Jackson out to left tackle. Now they're moving Hinsman back to center because Seth McLaughlin's injured. And so now they're going to have a brand new center to left side of the offensive line combination. These are all guys who have played. So it's not like they're doing something here that none of these guys have played. What are they going to do? But it's a brand new combination. It's a brand new combination on 3/5 of their offensive line. And so that can't just be patched together. I mean, they started this on Wednesday, I think, was the first day they had a chance to do this. So I think that's going to cause some issues. But I do think Cignetti's done an amazing job this year. I do think the talent gap is pretty significant. I just think that's going to overcome some things in this game for Ohio State. And of course, it being at home. But I think it's going to be a really good game. I think Indiana's going to do more than enough to solidify its playoff position. Is it going to be like a 5 or 6 seed? No, I think they're probably going to have to end up, assuming they lose. If they win, obviously, look, they're going to be seated really high. But if what I predict happens, if they lose, a 10-point game or something like that, I think they'll probably end up having to play a road game in the first round. Just because I think they're going to be behind 3 other Big Ten teams in the pecking order at that point. But the notion that they won't get in at 11-1, I think, is ridiculous. I think Ohio State would have to go. I mean, it would have to be more non-competitive than like any Ohio State game we've watched this year, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Like if they go like 31-7, like they did to Northwestern last week, I still think Indiana's in. Like I just don't think it's in the cards for the blowout that SEC fans think they need to or want to see. Although there's probably SEC fans who think if Ohio State wins by a point that they're not getting in, which I think is delusional. But like, I don't know. I think Indiana does more than enough this weekend.
I agree. I think Indiana is going to come in. Curt Cignetti, say what you will about, his public appearances in terms of like some people, kind of the dislike, how brash. Yeah, exactly. Brash and confident. I like the fact that he's not, these guys, they're coming in and instead of, thinking like, okay, like this is an anomaly that we're winning. He's like, no, like I'm used to winning. I've never had a losing season. And, for him to kind of take umbrage at the fact that, college football is all like aghast and like, I can't believe this upstart Indiana team, is crashing the party of the blue bloods that should never happen. I like the fact that Curt Cignetti is kind of coming in here like, hey, I expect to win. Our team expects to win. I agree with you. I think the talent gap is substantial, but I think as an Ohio State fan, I am fully prepared for this to go the distance. And, if anything, like exhaling after its conclusion, I think Ohio State wins. I think in the same kind of points realm that you just described a couple moments ago. But I think, Ohio State, all right, win this game and then get ready for the game because that's going to be big time on the minds of the coaching staff as well as the players. Yep.
So we'll see. I really like the slate. We got like 3 or 4 toss-up games, Ohio State, Indiana, and then you get the cool nightcap in the Rose Bowl with USC and UCLA. I think it's a really fun week in the Big Ten. So we'll be back on Monday to post our reaction to all the games and our big storylines from the weekend. But appreciate everyone watching and listening and enjoy all the football this weekend.
Thank you.